So let's talk about what actually caused the Boston Tea Party to happen. So it all started with the French and Indian War, and many people think it was just between the French and the Indians, but Great Britain was also involved. And something people ought to know is whenever you get involved into a war, it costs a lot of money. So after the war, Britain needed a lot of money. And so they thought of the idea to tax the colonists for the money that they needed after the war. However, this isn't as simple as it sounds. See, the colonists' life in New England was actually pretty hard. Money was really hard to get, and life was just generally hard there. So the colonists really didn't want to pay the taxes. Because the colonists were so far away from Great Britain, when the taxes were imposed on them, they felt like the British Parliament didn't have the right to have the authority over them, because they were so far away and they didn't understand the colonists' circumstances. It'd be kind of like if your mom told you to clean your room while she's in Japan. You probably wouldn't clean your room because she doesn't seem to have the same authority as she did whenever she's at home. And along with this, the colonists just felt really disconnected from Great Britain because of the distance, and they wanted their own leader because the British Parliament was so disconnected from the colonists. But the king at the time, which was King George III, really didn't have any sympathy for the colonists. He didn't care that life was hard there and they could hardly afford the taxes, and he didn't care that they felt disconnected. So whenever he passed the Tea Act, it was the last straw for the colonists. To boycott against this, the Sons of Liberty dressed up like Indians and snuck onto British ships which were in the Boston harbor and dumped all the taxed tea into the harbor. But what if the Boston Tea Party never actually happened? What if, instead of taxing the colonists, the king asked the colonists to do labor to help the war reparations? And the king actually realized that the colonists felt disconnected and answered this by having an extension of British Parliament in the colonies. This means that the colonists would have no reason to rebel against Great Britain, and so this means that America would just be an extension of British rule today. The first thing that would have changed is that the Intolerable Acts would have never happened. This means that the Boston Harbor would still be open, the colonists could still have town meetings, and all the other acts that were used to punish the colonists wouldn't have happened. And this means that Great Britain and the colonists would still have a good relationship. The second event that wouldn't have happened is the Revolutionary War, and this is obvious because the Revolutionary War started because the colonists wanted to rebel against British rule. And these rebellions wouldn't have happened if the king never taxed the colonists. With this in mind, all the people who died during the Revolutionary War would have lived, and the people who grieved over their loved ones wouldn't have had to deal with the grief. This also affected the slaves because they were drafted into the war just as the white men were, so they could find themselves in the same line of defense as a white man. This inspired ideas of freedom and equality, which led to the formation of rebellions. If the Revolutionary War never happened, these ideas would have never been inspired, and slavery might have been prolonged. The first long-term effect is that America would have a monarchy instead of a president, and America would not be the great melting pot. Starting with the monarchy, this means that there would be royalty governing America alongside Parliament instead of the President and Congress. And because of having different leaders, this means that the laws would be different too. Because the American colonies would just be an extension of England, no immigration would be allowed since it already has an established culture. This means that America would not be very diverse in race and in culture, and would not be titled the Great Melting Pot. The second long-term effect is that America would look different because of having different territory. Originally, later after gaining their independence, the colonists gained the Louisiana Purchase from the French. But now that the colonists represent Britain, they didn't get the land, because at the time the Napoleonic Wars were going on between the British and the French, so no negotiation was made since they were enemies. Because France never sold their land to the colonists, they began to expand westward and fought for territory, which made it really difficult for the colonists to expand towards the west coast. However, around this time, Spain and England were fighting against each other in the Anglo-Spanish War, and as a result of England's victory, New England gained Florida. In conclusion, without the Boston Tea Party and the other rebellious acts from the colonists, the United States wouldn't exist, America would be an extension of British rule, under a monarchy, and many lives would have changed if we were still under British rule today.